All right, what's up, everyone? It's Zach, and today I'm here with a very special guest. I'm here with Richard Lee Tai. Richard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you, and it's an honor, and I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Hmm.
So, Richard is honestly, in my opinion, probably one of the most perfect, ideal guests that I can have on this podcast. And the reason behind that is because he's a very passionate individual. And his passion is actually about connecting with others. So, passions and just that connection piece are two huge things for my podcast, of course. So, it's really, really cool that Richard has the same passions in the background. So, for those of you who do not know Richard yet, he is a TEDx speaker, and he is the founder of his business called Excuses to Connect. And he is also part of that business, a connection coach. So helping individuals connect, similar to how him and I are connecting today for actually
Hmm.
the first time, in essence, other than just kind of like small talk here and there. But
Yep.
yeah, that's a little bit about Richard. Do you mind kind of going a little bit more in depth about your background, who you are, the things you're up to, all that good stuff?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I'm flattered by your introduction of me as the perfect ideal guest.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah, I think what you gave was a great description of what I've been up to for the past few months, I would say. But it's like, how did I get into this whole connection thing anyway? Why am I
Yeah.
passionate about this? Because it's not like I just woke up as a child. I'm like, oh, my dream is to be a connector. It wasn't like that. So, how this sort of came about was gradually and through self reflection. So, one of the exercises I did, I learned this from a book called Grit, The Power, Passion, and Perseverance. It's by Angela Duckworth. And there's an exercise in there where she describes how we have different levels of goals in our life because there's like low level goals, mid level goals, and high level goals. Where it's like I'm doing X to get Y, and then I'm doing Y to get Z, and so on and so forth. But what's at that top of that hierarchy? What's something that you just do just for the sake of it? And so when I did that exercise and kept asking myself just like why and why and why, I realized at the very top that one line statement for me of my purpose is I create meaningful connections on the service of others. I came to that statement because I realized that's been the common thread anyway of all the extracurriculars and academic things I've done. Because I've done stuff like volunteering or being part of clubs. I was always very attracted to these positions where I could make connections and find a sense of community. And so that purpose is my driving force for everything I do. And so it's sort of just more recently expressed itself in this business of excuses to connect and doing a TEDx talk. But even prior to that, I was doing many things related to connection. And so that's like a brief overview
Okay.
of how I've gone to where I am.
Awesome. Now, Richard, it's interesting because hearing you explain that a little bit, you mentioned that you've been involved with extracurriculars that
Hmm.
involve, connecting with people or working with others or volunteer work. So that kind of led me to think that maybe you're more on the extroverted side of the spectrum. Would you say that that's accurate?
I that's an interesting observation.
Okay.
I would say no. I actually
Hmm.
identify as introverted because when it comes
Okay.
down to it, I my distinction I make between introversion and extroversion is how people use and regain their energy. So for
Okay.
me as an introvert, I use up energy in social situations and I find I need alone time to be able to recharge. Whereas for extroverts, they get a lot of their energy by being around others. A few
Hmm.
other qualifying statements I can make as well. As an introvert, I prefer interacting with people one to one or in small groups rather than being
Mm.
I'm in a large group. Like I'm not the life of the party. I don't like being I don't crave being the center of attention.
Okay.
Whereas for extroverts, they might be more inclined towards that.
Sure.
So even though I enjoy connecting with people and I do seek out these opportunities and activities where I can connect with people, um, I still identify as an introvert. It doesn't mean I'm shy. It means
Hmm.
I'm still confident with socializing with people, but I find that I need
Hmm.
that alone time to recharge. So yeah, that's how I would approach it. Because I the thing is like connection is a fundamental need regardless if you're introverted or extroverted. You
Right.
might have like differing levels of how much interaction you might be wanting in a day-to-day basis, but it's still fundamental for our well-being, and we
Right.
desire it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually love what you just said there, Richard. I think that that was a great explanation, and it's really cool because in my personal life, I have conversations with people and they say, like, it's so hard for me to connect with others, or I don't
Mhm.
like connecting with others because I am an introvert. But I think, like you
Interesting.
explained, like you don't have to just because you are extroverted or introverted, it doesn't necessarily make it easier or harder per se.
Yeah.
It's just, something that it can happen either way. It just might be what does that connection look like you said. So, like Richard, for you, that might be a one-on-one interaction, and that's your
Mhm.
form of connection. Whereas maybe I would say I'm more of an extrovert.
Mhm.
Maybe me making connections with others is getting together with 20 people and doing some like team building exercise or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's really important to anyone listening to know that even if you would identify as an introvert, that doesn't have to intimidate you when it comes to the idea of connecting with others because you can still do it on that kind of intimate one-on-one level or small group
Yeah.
or just have that kind of like space to also have time to re-energize yourself and not have to burn yourself out, if you will.
Yeah, I want to add more to this as well because I
Yeah.
am passionate about this idea of introverts connecting because I am an
Okay.
introvert.
Yeah.
So another book recommendation or a TED talk for people to check out. There's this author and researcher. Her name's Susan Cain, and her
Okay.
focus of her work is all about introversion. And
Mm.
so she wrote a book called Quiet, and the subtitle of it
Yeah.
is "The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking." And so it's not like an anti-extrovert book, but she does
Sure.
emphasize this element of society tends to value extroversion. It's like how our
Yeah.
systems and education is designed. It's like we value the people like that put their hands up and like speaks in front of the whole class and answers these questions,
Mhm.
or these charismatic public speakers and so on. But like, where's the room and where's the space for introverts because they have their own strengths as well.
Right.
If anything, perhaps introverts can connect better because they're better
Mm.
listeners and they tend to be more empathetic in that sense, where
Yeah.
instead of wanting to speak the whole time, they're okay with listening.
Yeah.
Because if I were to describe my communication style in general, I'm much more of a listener than a talker.
Okay.
And so that's why stuff like podcasting appeals to me because I just hold space and I listen and I give other people a platform for them to express themselves. And I find that rewarding just to be able to listen. If I were to put into percentage, it might be even the case that like 80% of the time I'm listening and I'm only speaking 20% of the time. And that's from my introverted
Hmm.
tendencies.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, different dynamics of conversation and
Yeah.
communication, I think, comes into play as well based on your personality.
Definitely. Definitely true. And I do want to just I guess, interject, if you will, and,
Yeah,
let
yeah.
everyone know that I forgot to mention in the introduction, but, Richard is also a fellow podcaster. So,
Yes.
yes, he also has his own podcast, so, it's also very cool to connect with the podcaster, and it's cool to kind of flip the script on him a bit and have him
Mhm.
on the other side of the microphone. So, yeah, just wanted to
Yeah.
mention that,
Yeah.
that Richard does have a podcast of his own. But, yeah, like you were saying, I think it's really interesting and something that I've actually I guess been, like, critiqued on, if critique's the right word,
Mm.
is people will say to me, like, "You're extroverted," but when I notice we're doing, like, a group project, whether it's academically or professionally, you
Mhm.
just sit in the corner and don't say anything. And I'm like,
Mm.
"Yeah, I mean, because I wanna observe it." Like, I don't
Right.
even though, like, I have a background in leadership and I like to, for better or worse, become the leader of situations, um,
Yeah.
I think it's, that like, I have that extroverted personality, like, I will raise my hand and answer questions like you mentioned, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I like to kinda have that introverted, just, like, observe, and I'd rather listen because I think the thing that
Mhm.
I've learned, especially as I've gotten older, is the less we talk and the more we listen, the more we will actually learn and gain from any situation, whether it's, like,
Right.
directions that we're being given or just, like, a conversation with someone else, like,
Right.
when you just sit back and can listen, just
Yeah.
so much more comes out.
I agree. Okay, I'm gonna ask you a question.
Yeah, of course.
So you brought up this scenario where, or you brought up the phrase of like, then you stepped up to be a leader. Or
Mhm.
what does leadership mean to you then, or what does that look like to
Ooh.
you?
Yeah, so I will say you're asking someone who, did their undergrad and is finishing their master's in leadership. So
Mhm.
I won't bore you with the theoretical approaches, but so what does leadership mean to me? So essentially, what I was kind of referring to in that sentiment was, I think a good example right now is in my graduate program. I'm in a class where we're doing a group project, and
Mhm.
to me, it's kind of 4 individuals coming together, and one person usually will become like that emergent leader, if you will. So the person that kinda
Mhm.
steps up and says like, "Hey, team, like, how are we gonna organize it? How are we gonna assign roles? XYZ." So I think for me, what I was kind of referring to is that in those situations, I kind of thrive on just like the type A personality and the type A stress personality that I have, where I
Mhm.
want to, like most humans, wanna have some sense of control. So, like, I'll find myself saying, like, you know, if we're meeting for the first time as a group for a project, it might be a lot of small talk. "Oh, what classes have you taken? How are you liking the class so far?"
Right.
Whereas I definitely wanna have that because I think building that rapport is important, but then
Mhm.
I also tend to be the first person that's like, "Alright, team, like, so we're all here, we're all feeling good about the project, let's divide the roles up now. Here's, like, the first part of the project, who wants to do that part?" And kind of like the
Mhm.
initiator role. So leadership, in that sense, I would say is someone that is willing to kind of initiate the conversation or create a plan for achieving the goals that the group shares.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so I'll provide my perspective on leadership
Yeah.
because I also identify as a leader as well, but I would use
Yeah.
terms like I'm a quiet leader, which might
Yes.
sound paradoxical, but it's in that sense of what you're describing as well, where
Yeah.
I don't feel the need or to dominate the conversation.
Sure.
I support more from like the behind the scenes and from a
Yeah.
very collaborative approach of wanting to hear everyone's input and then combining it in a way that we work
Mhm.
for together. It's not like saying, "This is my plan,
Right.
you all have to follow it."
Right.
It's not from that like I guess authoritative approach.
Yeah.
I think other aspects of being a good leader, as well as like having vision. It's like
Mhm.
being able to think outside of the box and think of
Yeah.
possibilities and think long term.
Yeah.
Um, Other thing too that came up was like adaptable leadership in the sense like
Sure.
at different stages of the project or your group development, it might
Mhm.
require a different leadership or communication style.
100%.
Because if there's lots of conflict going on within your team,
Yeah.
you need to resolve that from like an interpersonal, like empathetic way of
Mhm.
communicating
Yeah.
before you get onto like more task oriented, like let's get
100%.
that done sort of thing. So
Yeah.
that's the way I sort of view leadership as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that. Yeah, it's really cool, and Richard, you brought up so many good points that, like, I think that maybe societally or just based on media or whatever, when we think of a leader, like, there's this one kind of "this is what a leader looks like" kind
Yeah.
of image pressed into our minds, where, as you just elaborated on, there's so many different ways to lead, and there's not one that's better or worse. It's all dependent on the individual and how they like to lead or feel most comfortable doing so, and the situation itself. So, I think that that's another thing that, I think both of us can encourage anyone listening,
Yeah, definitely.
find your own leadership style and don't think you have to be, you know, XYZ example that you see in the movie, and that's like the captain of the football team is the only way to be a leader or something.
Exactly. I
Yeah,
agree. I think
awesome.
leader, there's some definition. I I think this is becoming evident.
Yeah,
very much a book reader.
yeah,
So,
I love it.
um, another author I'm a big fan of is Brene Brown. So she does a
Mhm,
lot of research
fantastic.
around shame and vulnerability and worthiness.
Yep,
And I'm trying to remember because she wrote a book as well called Dare to Lead, and there's a
yep,
definition of leadership in there. I don't remember word for word, but it's along the lines of like just anyone that has the power to influence others. So whether on a small or large scale, because even like community leaders, like if you organize events for your neighborhood or like these get-togethers, I
mhm,
also view that as leadership. It's not just
yeah.
like in a corporate sense. Yeah.
Yes, 100%, and I'm a huge Brene Brown fan myself. I'm totally drawing a blank on what I can't remember if it was a book or if it was a talk, but, as a perfectionist, it was like
Yeah.
myself, it was something about, like, being a perfectionist and how it's,
Uh-huh.
like, you just have to watch that and learn from it and everything, and that was, like, one thing that I can't remember the modality of it, but I remember I listened to it, so
Mhm.
it could have been an audiobook or presentation, but it really had a profound impact on me and just like challenging like the perfectionist tendencies that I have, or just
Yeah.
bringing awareness to it.
I also had that revelation as
Yeah.
well. The first piece of content I got from Brene Brown was reading her book Daring Greatly.
Hmm.
And in there, she talked about basically these different armors or like coping mechanisms
Yeah.
we have for shame.
Hmm.
And one of the common ones is perfectionism.
Yep.
And so when I was reading her description of it, I'm like, oh my God, Brene, you're calling me out.
Yeah.
Like, these are all these thoughts that I've always had, but I've never seen it articulated on paper.
Yeah.
Basically, for listeners that are unaware or haven't read her work or are unfamiliar with this, what she says is perfectionism really is just this self-destructive belief
Hmm.
that if you're perfect enough that you won't feel blamed or judged or this feeling of shame.
Right.
And the reason it's self-destructive is because, well, one, people can't actually be perfect. There's no
Yeah.
such thing of that. And two, it's like then you're like in the cycle of just blaming yourself where like, oh, if
Hmm.
I didn't perform well enough, then you just blame it on yourself like, oh, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't perfect enough, and I just need to work harder.
Right.
And this also like being very tied with external validation instead
Yeah.
of finding internal self-worth. So that's something I had to unlearn as well because I feel like
Yeah.
I internalized it through my upbringing
Hmm.
of like, oh, if I achieve high grades, then I'll receive praise. And so I
Right.
think that got linked in my head. But even even though I was achieving a lot of things and I would feel a temporary sense of fulfillment, it's only temporary. Then like my
Yeah.
mind's like, oh, what's the next thing I need to do? And so on. So I've learned to unlearn that
Yeah.
so that I can feel like I have like that I am already good enough without needing external validation, but still maintaining that aspect of working hard because I do see that as one of my strengths. So it's been a journey.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it, and I'm definitely with you on that, Richard. That's a journey that I've been on and I'm still on where, I think it's weird, and maybe you can resonate with it a little bit. You know, I've accomplished things in my life, and you know, d- I would say they're substantial things or things that
Mhm.
get deserve praise, and maybe externally people are like, "Oh, you've done this, this, and that. Like that's so cool," but internally, I'm like, "Okay, like I haven't done enough. Like I need to do something
Right.
more. I need to keep on
Yeah.
like upgrading, or going farther, I guess, if that makes sense, or
Yeah.
going above and beyond even more." So I think that
Mhm.
that comes with that like external validation piece that you mentioned, where it's like people are like, "Oh, you're great, like you accomplished this," and you're like, "Yep, I did." Like that's very great, but it's a temporary feeling of accomplishment,
Yeah.
and you're just kind of like continuing to chase after it. Whereas when you can switch and have more of that internal validation, that you don't need to keep saying, "I need to achieve XYZ, get good grades all the
Yeah.
time," for
Yeah.
that temporary dopamine release, if you will. Like, it needs to come internally.
Yeah, for sure. There's a line in her book that says, it's along the lines of the simplest and hardest thing is just shifting this belief of
Mhm.
I am not enough to I am enough.
Yeah,
It's as simple as that, just believing it, but like shifting that belief takes time.
it does.
And yeah, certainly for me, even though I've done a lot of that self work, there's times too where self doubt or
Mhm.
the big thing too is like comparison to
Yeah,
others. It's like, oh, these people seem more successful than I am or more
right,
happy than I am, and so I find my like there's that comparison there that then makes me feel like I'm not enough yet.
right.
But trying to disconnect myself from that because I sometimes get that too. It's interesting because um I've also been the recipient of like praise of them saying like, oh, Richard, you looks like you're so successful, you're doing all these
Mhm.
things, and I'm just like, I'm a normal dude.
Right, right.
Like, yes, I've done a TED talk, I've started my own business, I do these all sort of things,
Yeah,
but I think what it fundamentally gets at is I don't want people to compare themselves to me either.
right.
One of the fundamental things I've learned, or for my worldview about human connection, is I try to see people as equals. It's
Mhm.
not that I'm better than someone or someone's worse than me. It's just that we're different and we've had different life circumstances and accumulated experiences. But once
Mhm.
I start viewing people from this like position of like um, that they're better than me or they're worse than me, that actually puts a block or barrier to connecting. Because say
Yeah.
for example, I I come across some person and they're like a CEO of this company, they have this long list of achievements and all that, then my mind goes to, oh my gosh, they're so inaccessible. There's no way I'm ever going to be able
Mm.
to talk with them, right? There's that
Yeah.
already that huge perceived distance.
Yep.
But if I instead shift my mindset of thinking, they're a human too,
Right.
and all humans want to be seen and heard and
Yeah.
valued, and all humans struggle with self-doubt or other struggles that you might not see,
Mhm.
and so on, right? If I approach it from that lens, then it doesn't matter what their list of achievements are. Like at the end of the
Right.
day, they're still human, and so I can connect with them on that level. And so that's why I'm also hesitant in terms of like when people like praise me of like, oh Richard, you've done all those things. Like, okay, I don't want there to be that barrier or distance
Sure.
that's being created there, of somehow like I'm better than them and like I don't want to talk with them or whatever. That's not the
Right.
case, because there's a difference between what we do and who we are. And I
Yeah.
think we connect with who we are. Like, sure, like my list will continue growing of my resume and
Mhm.
what I do, but like fundamentally, I'm something more than just what I do.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that the thing that I've had extensive conversations with, or sorry, conversations about with people kind of like in my kind of age range and people,
Hmm.
in college and stuff is that this idea that we're kind of shifting the belief from we don't have to be what we do. So, like, a lot of
Right.
people identify themselves as what they do. Like, I
Yep.
am a cook, I
Yeah.
am
Yeah.
a doctor. And it's not bad to take pride in what you do or to
Right.
have that being a big part of your life, but we don't have to be defined by our work or what we've accomplished or maybe not have accomplished. I think that, like you said, you are Richard, I am Zach. It doesn't
Yep.
matter what I have done or you have done. At the end of the day, we're humans, and
Yep.
although we might have a list of things that we've done or things that we want to accomplish, we're much more beyond that. And I think, like you said, breaking down those kind of barriers and just
Yeah.
seeing people for who they are and for seeing them as humans. And I think it made me think of the idea of that we're all very different but the same at the same time, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, this aspect of doing versus being, because there's
Mhm.
this quote I love too. It's like we're human beings, not human doings.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's like we're not just defined by our work or our
Mhm.
productivity. There's more to us than that. And yeah, I love to connect with people on that level. And that aspect of what you're saying, like there's these differences and similarities. I'm a big fan of this project called Humans of New York.
Yeah.
And basically, the premise of that is like this photographer went out to the streets of New York and interviewed strangers and shared their
Mhm.
stories online.
Yep.
And he has millions of followers now, and that idea has spread all around the world of different like humans of Toronto or humans of Calgary, like
Yeah.
whatever location. And I think why it resonates so much with people is it's exactly that. It gives them in this candid window into these other
Mhm.
people's lives of like both seeing like how different it is, but like these similarities too, and like this common human experience and struggles that we have. So I love
Yeah.
it. I started a similar project actually
That's what I was gonna say,
at my
yeah.
university called Humans of ULETH for University of Lethbridge, where I interviewed students and professors and staff, and I got that firsthand experience of as well of like people just have everyone has their own story, and
Yeah.
it's very rewarding, and I feel like a deep connection is formed when you get to know someone's story.
100%. Yeah, I love it, and, I'm a big fan of Humans of New York, and, honestly, I mean, like, those kind of projects have been some of the inspiration behind this podcast,
Hmm.
kinda like the origin story of just really me just connecting with friends or just people that I'm recently meeting and like, "Wow, this person has a really cool story. They're really passionate about this." I would have never realized they're passionate about cooking unless, I had this conversation with them, so it
Right.
was just kind of like seeing the humanness of humans and being
Hmm.
able to kind of like create that platform for people to share their experiences and the human experience of like your passion doesn't have to be what you do to pay the bills. It doesn't have to
Right.
be what is quote unquote popular or, whatever. Like it can be whatever you want. And I think that's the beautiful thing about people is that everyone's unique. And I always say that you can learn so much from any person, any situation. You just have to be open to learning from it. And I think that that's one of my favorite parts about connecting with people. Just how much you can learn just about them,
Yeah.
about yourself, about the world, about views, whatever. So
Mhm.
it's that's why I think it's so cool that you are in that kind of connection space and you have excuses to connect and your
Yep.
connection coach and everything. I think that sometimes we forget the value of connecting these days.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Definitely, I mean, the past 2 years, it's been a
Mhm.
weird time in the
Yeah,
world.
sure.
Um, and so I myself included, like our social networks have been disrupted because we
Yeah,
haven't had these opportunities as we did before of interacting in person, and all these
right.
things shifted online, and some maybe we lost touch with people and connected
Mhm.
with new friends and shifted communities. So I think there's been a lot of that flux.
Yeah.
And one thing I've heard as well, from people is like that they feel like their social skills are rusty. It's like
Yeah,
I haven't met new people in so
yeah,
long. How do I actually socialize? Which I
yeah.
think is a fair concern because it's just recognizing that that's normal considering
Mhm.
the circumstances, and you don't have to beat yourself up about it. But the
Right.
other point I was going to make too, it's like it's social skills. It's a muscle that you can actually exercise and strengthen.
Yeah.
You're not in a permanent state of like, oh, I'm socially awkward and I'll always be like that. No, that's not
Right.
true. It's like you can actually develop skills, which does require courage and vulnerability, but like being able to connect with others is a skill that you can develop. So that's a point that I really try to emphasize through my work as well.
I love that, and I love the idea that, like you said, social skills. I mean, it's
Yep.
it's in kind of like the the wording of itself, but I think it's things that people just think, "Oh, this person inherently knows how to talk to others," or, whatever,
Yeah.
but they are skills that we have to sharpen and hone and practice and everything. I mean, just like learning an instrument or playing a
Hmm.
sport or whatever, you have to practice those to get confidence and to improve upon them, and I think that definitely people, myself included, probably would say that they do feel a little rusty, from a lack of using those skills over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So, Richard, my question for you is like, how do you think that, I guess, moving forward and, in the world, some places might be a little different with how the pandemic's going right now, but moving forward, how do you think this kind of time that we're going through is going to impact our ability to connect with people or just like connections in general?
Yeah. I wish I could read into the future.
Yeah, I wish you could too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna because I want to like present as nuanced of a view as possible because I don't
Sure,
think it's just a black and white thing. Because
exactly.
like it, people have experienced the pandemic differently. Like I guess I'll just start with
Yeah,
stating that that statement because people have been disproportionately affected, like based on like different varying levels of like privilege that you have.
sure.
Like some people lost their jobs and like are put in a very precarious situation and so
Mhm.
on. So I just want to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah,
But in terms of connections, I don't know. It's interesting because on one hand, I sort of see like, is the world becoming more divisive and
yeah.
like there's so much more confrontational us versus them mentality, or are
Mhm.
we becoming more united and empathetic?
Right.
So it's interesting because I mean, there's lots of sensitive political health policy, various issues that like people have very strong opinions about, and
Yeah.
then instead of seeing each other as humans, it's more seen as like they're the enemy
Mhm.
and we're in the right. So it's interesting because there's those divides there as well. So I guess my what am I trying to say? I feel like I'm just sort of rambling.
No, you're good.
I guess what I would emphasize to listeners is like everyone has their own individual responsibility and ability to make connections
Mhm.
and treat people with compassion and empathy, um, and like do the work if you want of like trying to bridge these gaps and differences that
Mhm.
you think people might have. Because similarly to what I was saying before, is like you're more than what you do.
Yeah.
And I also think like you're more than just certain labels you put on that you might identify with as well. Like say
Mhm.
someone identifies like, oh, I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative or I believe
Yep.
this or I believe that. Like, yes, that's part of who that person is, but it's not who they are completely. And I
Right.
think it's just too easy to generalize by saying like, oh, this person is behaves this way because they believe what they associate with this political party. That's just too easy of a generalization, and it doesn't actually fully capture the humanness and holisticness of that person. And so I guess, I mean, I'm still working on it too.
Yeah.
Because certainly there's people I interact with that like I disagree with them, but how can I still connect with them on a human to human level despite those differences? And trying to understand their perspective and approach it with empathy. Because yeah, it's a weird time. Again, I don't know if like
Yeah.
we're becoming increasingly divisive or like increasingly united, but I think individuals have their own power and responsibility to influence that in their sphere of people they interact with.
Richard, I might revoke what I said, and maybe you can see into the future.
Okay.
It's
Sounds
funny
good.
because I was actually one of the questions I was gonna ask you as you started that
Yeah.
explanation was kind of like, I wanna give you a scenario,
Hmm.
you know, Joe has XYZ beliefs and, politically or socially, whatever, and John has, the opposite.
Yeah.
How can they connect? And you pretty much addressed it. So I do think you can see into the future, at least maybe like a couple minutes into the future.
Yeah.
But no, I think what you said is spot on. That just because we have different views or opinions on whatever, I mean, it could be politics, it could be
Hmm.
social justice. I mean, it could even be like sports or something. Like, oh, I'm a big this
Yep.
team fan, and I don't wanna get along with anyone that's of the
Yep.
rivals team or whatever, but just knowing that, like, there is that human behind their beliefs or their thoughts, or it doesn't
Hmm.
make up that whole person, and I think, like you said, just having, like, empathy and understanding, and I think one of the most valuable things we can do is have that openness to connect with people that maybe have different thoughts or opinions than we do, because I think
Hmm.
it helps us become more well-rounded in our beliefs or our kind
Yeah.
of thought processes.
Yeah. Definitely. Another book recommendation.
Yeah.
There's this book called Think Again by Adam Grant, which
Okay.
talks on this topic of like changing our deeply held beliefs. Because
Mm.
really, it's flimsy to start with. Like, why do we believe the things we believe? If we really
Yeah.
like dove into it, it's like it's just like most of the time it's like just a product of our upbringing and
Right.
what the people around us are saying.
Right.
And it's interesting because Adam Grant also talks about this in his research about sports teams because it's a seemingly very arbitrary things, but
Yeah.
people are very fanatical or can be
Yeah.
around sports teams. Like, oh, I identify with this sports team, and then the
Yeah.
other people are like these lists of traits of how the other group is like.
Sure.
But it's like actually they believe quite similar things,
Yeah.
and it's just how like what Adam is trying to emphasize is just to think again, like rethink your deeply held beliefs, because that's one of the steps towards actually bridging this gap of this divide. Because if I just put myself in my shoe, in another person's shoes, like, okay, if I grew up in their environment,
Mhm.
would I would have had the same beliefs as well.
Right.
And so, or if someone grew up in my environment, then they would have grown up with my beliefs. And so, just seeing from that perspective, it's not necessarily right or wrong.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's there's another podcaster actually I had on my show. His name is Corey Nathan, and he runs a podcast called Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, which I
Okay.
love. I love the name.
Yeah, I love that.
And so I was asking Corey about like, well, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And he gave lots of wonderful tips. One I that stood out to me, he calls it feel, felt, found.
Yeah.
And so what he means by that is forcing himself to say, like, I understand how you feel. I would
Mhm.
have felt the same way if I was in your situation. And then just sort of walking through that mental process of like really embodying and being in their shoes, and seeing what they found from that, like being in their shoes,
Yeah.
and really understanding that other person's perspective before like you've
Mhm.
earned the right to offer your own. So I
Yeah.
think that type of exercise is helpful as well, because it's really easy to just stereotype and jump into
Mhm.
conclusions, but it takes more effort to actually reevaluate
Yeah.
my own views as well, because of course I
Yes.
have my own biases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and it's funny because I'm actually really familiar with the feel, felt, found,
Uh,
ideology. It's pretty big in psychology, so,
cool.
like, that's what I did my undergrad in. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's something that we've certainly covered a lot in my academics and, just
Yeah.
practice that kinda skill. So I've implemented that in my life, and I can totally attest to, that it can be really, good for us to do it and kinda reevaluate for sure.
Yeah.
But Richard, I am curious now. So I won't even say that this has to be related to the last couple of years in terms of how the world has shifted a bit, but just I guess more as a general statement. What are your thoughts on technology when it comes to connecting?
Mm,
Even before, the pandemic and whatnot, I feel like some people would say that we just text now. There's no real connection. There's no human connection. We're not getting together in person. We're, you
right.
know, just doing this all electronically now. Do you think that technology is good for connecting? Do you think it's hindering us from connecting? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so going back to what I said before,
Yeah,
of like, I try to see things from as much of a nuanced view as I
sure.
can. Because in this scenario, if I just simply label technology as good or
Yeah,
technology is bad, that's way too simplistic.
sure. Yeah,
Because the way I think of it, it's like it's a tool
yeah.
and it has both good and bad aspects,
Mm,
and it's sort of dependent on the user.
okay.
Okay, I was about to go down this whole tangent too of obviously the designer has some biases too, but let's just talk from the user perspective, because and to talk in more practical terms,
Yeah,
because I think in some ways, yes, like technology and social media has created more divides.
yeah,
Because I mean, I've experienced it myself where like social media can be negative for my mental health because it sort of sparks all this comparison all the time of like, oh, this
yeah.
person has more likes or more followers. And then I'm very attached to those metrics of trying to make
Hmm.
myself like feel like I'm good enough because
Right.
I have all these comments and viewers and so on. So certainly I think that's been an aspect that perhaps has made our connections more difficult.
Yeah,
But on the other side too, I've also seen since the pandemic that I've connected with people online all around the world that
yeah,
I've never done before. Like before the pandemic, I was in the mindset of I'm only limited to connecting with people geographically, like within my own city or my own school. I
yeah.
never thought of going to online events or having online calls with people. But since then, I connect. I I know people all around the world. Like we
Yep.
would not be having this conversation if it was not for
Exactly.
technology. And so
Exactly.
I think there's that aspect of it too, that it can be this great tool for connection. And I do think deeper connection does come from like having face to face conversations where you can
Okay.
really get to know that person and their story,
Yeah.
which might not happen as like just through texting. But
Right.
I do see social media and texting as like the gateway. It's your first
Yeah.
step, because like there's people whose work I have really like, they do work within connection and I'm very interested. And I just send them a DM. I'm like, I've seen all these cool things you're doing. I'd love to be able to chat. So the chat is just like the first step in the door to building that deeper connection.
Yeah.
So I think technology really helps to facilitate that. And if I can give a good example of how technology can give or facilitate connection, there's this
Yeah.
platform called Lunch Club, which I discovered during the pandemic. It's
Okay.
lunchclub.com. And what it does, it pairs people up with similar interests just for casual, like coffee chatting.
Mm.
And I've had very positive experiences on that platform. The algorithm does a really good job of connecting people with similar interests. So I've like connected with other coaches or public speakers or
Awesome.
entrepreneurs and so on. And it's great because everyone on there has the intention to just connect. It's not about me selling them something or they're trying
Right.
to sell me something. It's just like, I just want to chat.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good example of like technology has uh, help reduce all those barriers and just created that excuse to connect,
Yeah.
the environment there for people to connect with one another. Actually, one of the calls I had, which I bring up quite a lot, is like I joined the call and the lady introduces herself. She's like, I'm a vice president at Adidas. And I'm like, what? It's like, where else would I be talking to you right now?
That's crazy. Yeah.
So, I mean, I mean, a bit like awestruck for a little bit, but I
Right.
realized, just circling back to what I said before, they're just human.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't matter what their title is. So, had a great chat with her, and afterwards, she connected me with other people too. It's like, oh, Richard, I think you'd love to chat with this person, so I'll make an introduction for you.
I
So,
love that.
yeah,
Awesome. Yeah,
yeah,
I
go ahead.
think no, I was just gonna say, yeah, I think it's, really cool how technology can enhance, potentially enhance our ability to connect, and
Hmm.
it's funny how, like you said, I think we had these kind of, like, preconceived notions 2 years ago about, like, "Oh, I can't just, like, hop on a call with people all over the world, like, I have to go in
Yeah.
person to meet people," and then just seeing that how crazy technology has I guess, developed in advance, that it gives us so many more opportunities and platforms to connect with people.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's a changing world.
Yes, it is
And
indeed.
yeah, well, I think it's just much more normalized to go on online calls and events too. I'm sure there used to
Yeah,
be online events in the past, but like not as frequently as there have been nowadays.
sure.
It's interesting because, for example, some other communities I joined during the pandemic, I'm part of Toastmasters, which is
Okay.
this international organization to help people with their public speaking and leadership skills.
Yeah,
And the club that I'm a part of uh, used to be in person and then switched to Zoom.
okay.
And now we're deciding just to be permanently on Zoom,
Nice. Okay.
which is interesting because some people might have the mindset that, oh, in person is inherently better. And that's what we're just
Right,
waiting to return back to. But
right.
that's not the case because there's some inherent advantages with being online as well. Because, for example, uh, the club had international members like from all around the world, and
Yeah,
they're able to join in and participate because it's online. It's not just limited to like we need to physically go to a building to have our meeting.
right.
So
Exactly. Yeah, I
yeah.
think it's that accessibility piece that is really nice about technology.
Mhm. So technology will continue growing and
Yep.
we'll see where it takes us. I know like Facebook and like metaverse and what, anyway, we'll see where the world leads, but at
Yes.
the end of the day I see it as a tool, and like the user, you can choose how to utilize it.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great way to look at it, and I really appreciate your kind of nuanced approach to some of these questions because I think that so often we do kind of make things more black and white, and what you said with technology and having that as a tool for connecting and communication. I think that that's like the common thing people say about like a hammer. It can be a tool or it can be a weapon. It depends on the
Mm,
user, how you use it, and I think that similarly, technology, it can be used as a great tool,
yeah.
to successfully facilitate connections, or it can maybe not be a good tool depending on how it's used. So I think that that was a really good kind of high level way to break things down. So I appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing your perspective on that for sure. So Richard, to someone that's listening right now, let's say we have a listener who is really, really enjoying this conversation and they're like, I'm so motivated to go connect with people. I really want to connect. Richard really taught me the importance of connecting, but I don't know where to start. I don't know how to do it. I'm worried, I'm nervous. What would you want to share with that individual or that listener to kind of help them in their maybe new journey of finding excuses to connect, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. And I've been through that too. Like there
Yeah.
was a part of my life where I was also very afraid of connecting with people, like for fear of rejection or fear of it
Yeah.
being awkward or so on. I learned this great tool from my university counselor, actually. So I went to counseling services when I was in university, and she gave me this tool called a fear ladder. And so
Mm,
I'll describe it for listeners right now. So if you imagine a ladder and you imagine that your goal is at the top of the ladder, and then there's all these different rungs or steps to get to it. So let's say the goal is I want to build more meaningful connections with people. you can then break down that goal to like, what are the different steps I can take and what's the different fear rating that's associated
Mm,
with it. Because I might tell someone's like, okay, just approach a random stranger in the street and start a conversation.
yeah,
And for someone that's not used to it, that might be like a 9 or 10 on their fear ladder because it's just like,
yeah,
what are you telling me to do?
right.
So the point is like then to reflect on like what's the first step on your ladder? What's this the fear rating of like a 1 out of 10 for you? Something that's slightly outside of your comfort zone, but still feels doable. So it might
Hmm.
be the case of just, I don't know, like making eye contact with someone as you're passing by on the street and like giving them a nod.
Yeah.
Or if you're at a coffee shop and like the barista's asking like how's your day, right? Just responding and starting some conversation there because you already know that they want to talk, or I guess they're
Hmm.
obligated to talk as part
Right.
of customer service, right? So you
Sure.
don't even need to initiate the interaction, like they're already receptive to it. And so it's just figuring out what's the first step on your fear ladder and then practicing that behavior enough until you feel confident. It's like, okay, let's go to the second step and third step and build up that confidence because everyone's going to be at a different place right now in terms of their level of like comfort
Yeah.
or confidence with interacting with people. And that's okay. Like, just recognize where you're at and just seeing like what's the little like the first step you can take that's outside of your comfort zone to build up that confidence. So yeah, that's the most practical way I could put it. Certainly, I mean, I have lots of resources or recommendations of like there's different platforms or apps or
Hmm.
games you can connect with people that like yeah just help facilitate it in that way. But it's ultimately comes back to some self reflection as well.
Definitely. I think that that's really important. And I like that analogy of the kind of fear ladder. And
Hmm.
I mean, it gives a great visual, of course. And then just kind of knowing like your goal is at the top.
Yeah,
How do you get to the top? You have to slowly, climb that ladder,
yeah,
and it takes steps and time. But once you get there, you will get there. You can see what's at the top of the ladder. So you just have to work towards it. So I really like that analogy.
yeah. And again,
Awesome.
it connects back to like it's social skills. It's a
Yeah.
muscle to exercise. And also, I guess for listeners, like if you're really enjoying this conversation, like I'd love to connect with people. So like
Yeah.
you're definitely free to reach out to me too, and we could have a conversation.
I love that. Yeah, definitely, just our, like, off the recording conversations have been great connections, and I've always loved the energy that you have and just the conversations we have, the things we talk about, so definitely,
Mhm.
I would also encourage anyone listening, if anything in this conversation really resonated with you, or you just want to connect with someone, or, I mean, even maybe you want to connect with someone, but you're a little nervous, I think Richard would
Mhm.
be a perfect person to kind of I don't wanna call it practice in the sense that, like, Richard's, like, not a real person that you wanna connect with, but,
Yeah, yeah,
like, just to kinda connect in, like, a safer environment where
definitely.
it's gonna be someone that's really, um, just understanding and
Yep.
wanting to connect too.
Yep.
So, definitely reach out to Richard. Best place for you, would that be your Instagram if anyone wants to reach out?
Yeah, I
Okay.
can plug where people could reach me. Yes, you can find me
Yeah.
on Instagram. I'm at Richard Leetai, RichardLeethai on Instagram. I guess if there's more like professionally oriented listeners, you can also connect with me on LinkedIn at the same name. And yeah, just send me a message and I read those and reply. So
Perfect. Yeah, and I will put Richard's contact and social media links, podcast, all that good stuff, website in the description of this episode. So
mhm.
if you didn't catch Richard's information, just go down to the description, and all that will be laid out for you there. But yeah, definitely reach out to Richard and just I that will be my challenge for anyone listening. Reach out to Richard and try to connect with him about something that you are passionate about. So
Yeah,
we're combining my passion for passions and Richard's passion for connections, and let's have a conversation. Get to know Richard through your
yeah.
passions.
Yeah, literally, you could just message me as like, "Hey, I listened to the ZAP podcast, the
Yeah.
episode, and I thought this would be a great excuse to connect. So, hi, Richard."
I love it. That's perfect. So
Yeah.
yes, that is our call to action, anyone listening. Um, but in addition to that, Richard, are you currently taking on clients for your connection coaching?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
am. Yeah, because this is the work that I'm passionate about, like helping
Yeah.
people to live a more connected life and making meaningful connections easier for them.
Yeah.
Because as I was saying before, it's like it's a struggle. It can be a struggle,
Mhm.
and but at the same time, it's a very fundamental human need to have connections, right?
Yeah.
To combat the loneliness that we might have in our life. So, yes, that information's on my website as well. So it's just like very intensive one-on-one coaching with people
Okay.
to help them along their journey of connection. So I've developed various
Perfect.
tools and resources to support them with that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So then, to anyone listening, if you want to just connect with Richard for the sake of connecting, by all means, connect with him that way. If you would like to see if maybe the two of you can work together in a one-on-one setting as
Mhm.
your connection coach, also, I think that Richard would be a great resource for you. So, as he said on his website, he has some more information on that laid out. So, whether it's just for leisure to connect with someone or to maybe see if you can have Richard as your own connection coach, definitely reach out to him. And I think he would be a tremendous person to learn from and to connect with and get to know on that more meaningful level.
Mhm.
Um, Richard, one of the last questions that I want to ask you is you've said throughout this conversation meaningful connections. You've
Yeah.
used the word meaningful.
Right.
What is a meaningful connection, or what does that look like, or how do we know whether a connection that we just had with someone was or was not meaningful?
Okay. I so Brene Brown also has a definition of connection,
Yeah.
which I'm trying to remember at the top of my head. Here. I feel like I should have it memorized at this point, but I guess if I were to paraphrase, really, partially it's a feeling,
Mhm.
because when you're leaving an interaction with someone, are you feeling drained or are you feeling energized? I
Right.
think that's a sign of whether or not that connection has been meaningful. And is it like, do you get the feeling that or thoughts like, I'd love to spend more time with this person? Or is it that, like, okay, I want to limit my interactions with this person? And so I think it's a meaningful connection is one where you feel seen and heard and valued, and you feel mutually supported as well along with your goals. One example I can provide to this, recently I made this social media post about how it's so strange. Like over the course of a week, I got like messages from four different people in my network of saying like, "Hey Richard, I saw this opportunity and I thought of you for this." And this included like a speaking engagement opportunity and like a potential business partnership or this job posting. And so I'm like, what's happening?
Right.
But what I came to realize is this came about because I had been slowly cultivating these meaningful connections with people,
Yeah.
and they're telling me of these opportunities not because they're trying to secretly sell me something or because I asked them. It's more so that they care about me and they want to support me towards my dreams, and same with me for them as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that also is a signifier of a meaningful connection where there's that reciprocity there rather than it
Yeah.
being one-sided or transactional of like, I'm just trying to sell something to you, that sort of thing. It's actually caring for each other in a long-term way and wanting to see each other grow. Another analogy I can use as well is, and that's been framing my 2022. It's the analogy of planting and growing seeds.
Mm.
So every time you meet someone new, it's like you're planting a new seed, which still takes time to cultivate, right? Like it
Right.
takes many interactions to build a deeper relationship with someone. But if you spend that time, you put it in the right environment, like you water it and so on, like then it can blossom into this long-term relationship with others. So
Yeah. I love
yeah.
that. Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and I've always kind of been someone that talks about energy, if you will, so, like, good energy, negative energy, positive energy, and stuff like that, and I feel like I've always, like, informally said, when you leave a conversation, when you leave an event, when you leave whatever, how do you feel afterwards? Do you feel drained? Do you feel
Yeah.
energized? How do you feel? And I think that what you said is a probably better way to articulate what I've
Mhm.
just been, thinking all these years and kinda sharing informally, but,
Yeah.
I think that, that's a really, really good indicator of whether a connection was meaningful. How do you feel afterwards? And
Mhm.
even if it's not a first time connection, even if it's someone that you've known all of your life, when you grab coffee with that person, when you talk to them, how do you feel afterwards?
Mhm.
Do you feel drained? Do you feel enthusiastic? Do you feel, you know, energized, I think that that's an indicator of how that connection was. And if you find that maybe a connection you had wasn't meaningful,
Yeah.
that doesn't have to be like, oh, that's terrible, I'm never going to talk to this person ever again.
Hmm.
By no means. It's just kind of one of those things where we could say like, okay, maybe something was off or whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of that introspection piece of like, how can we make it become a meaningful, exchange or relationship, or have that value conversation between two
Right.
individuals.
Yeah. I mean, on that point as well, it's like
Yeah.
not everyone's gonna get along with each other.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, and that's okay. That's just
Yeah.
normal. I'm reading another book right now too. It's called We Should Get Together. It's by Kat Velos, and she's a
Okay.
expert on like friendship. And so
Hmm.
she breaks it down to these four different components of frequency, proximity, compatibility, and commitment.
Okay.
And these are sort of the ingredients that go into making a meaningful connection with someone. Because one is frequency. It's like, well, how frequently are you interacting?
Right.
And it might be the case that there are people in your life that you enjoy spending time with, but it's not like you want to spend every week with them.
Sure.
Right. And so just sort of having that conversation, it's like, I value our relationship, but I'm good with just like meeting once a month or like a few times every year.
Right.
Right. And that's perfectly normal because we have different levels of relationships with like very close
Hmm.
friends and like more distant friends and just colleagues and so on. And that's okay.
Right.
Also considering stuff of like proximity, because
Yeah.
like if you are physically close to someone, it does allow for a deeper connection if you can actually meet face to face for coffee and that sort of thing. But
Right.
certainly deep connections can still be built digitally and like across long distances. And then around like commitment and compatibility, it's like, do you actually share similar values or interests? Because those become the grounds to actually connect with people. Because I
Definitely.
don't feel like I'll connect well with someone that like we have zero interest in common.
Right.
Like it might be interesting like intellectually, but in terms of a long-term connection, that might not
Hmm.
last, right? So
Right.
stuff like that to consider as well.
Yeah. I think those are all good considerations. And I don't know why this came to mind, but as you're kind of like talking through everything, I just thought of the idea of like food.
Hmm.
Kind of like you said, or I guess we both said, if you connect with someone and you don't find it meaningful, or not everyone's going to get along, I think it's kind of like food. Like you don't know if you're going to like a food until you try it.
Yeah.
You might say like, it's okay or not for me, or you might find out that you love it. And I think that same with kind of having those varying degrees of relationships, friendships that we have with people. I think, and that goes with our interests and things that we have in common and proximity and all that
Yeah.
good stuff is like we might have our favorite meal, and then we might have like things that
Hmm.
we like here and there. So I think
Yeah.
it's just kind of like it's a weird analogy comparing it to food, but that's just kind of like what clicked in my mind. I was like, oh, food, people, connections, it all makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the analogy you said still makes sense because it's
Yeah,
just we have different circles and levels of relationships with people.
exactly. Yeah. Definitely. So, Richard, as we are wrapping things up, do you have any last kind of thought, message, words, or anything that you want to share with anyone that's listening to us today?
Yeah. So the motto I live my life by is you never know how any connection can transform your life. And the reason that's my motto is there's been so many times in my life where that's been the case of meeting the right person at the right time has led to all these other opportunities and doors opening. And that's essentially like why it's so important to me that okay, excuse me, I'm gonna clear my throat.
You're good.
So essentially, I think that's why it's so important to me that people can build these meaningful connections in your life, and why I want people to have the confidence to do that, because you just never know where meeting that one person or sending that one message can lead you. And so yeah, I'd like to leave listeners with that message, and that it's possible for you to make these connections. It can be easier than you think it is.
Yeah, I love it. I think that that's a perfect way to end things today. And just a quick kind of like anecdotal story, just to kind of emphasize what Richard just said is long story short, I had a friend. This friend and I were chatting, and they randomly mentioned this individual named Rob Lawless. I'm sure a lot of you listening probably know who Rob is. He was also on one of the episodes early on. I connected with Rob. That connection led me to meeting someone that you've also heard on the podcast, Eric Chow. And knowing Eric has connected me to Richard,
Yep.
and now Richard and I are connected. And, it's like this one random friend that I chatted with very casually has led to this conversation that you're hearing today.
Mhm.
One simple connection that I didn't really think would mean that much, to be honest, has turned into various podcast episodes, various great relationships, and my connection here with Richard, I can 100% wholeheartedly say, in my mind, it has been very meaningful, and I definitely look forward to connecting with him in the future. So that's just, again, one of those examples of how you just never know what connecting with one person can bring into your life.
Yes, definitely. And
Awesome.
yes, I also thought this was a very meaningful conversation, and Zach's going to be on my podcast as well. So
Yes,
stay
yes.
tuned for that.
Yes, definitely stay tuned to that. I'm super excited to be a part of your podcast, Richard. I can't wait for that. But thank you so much for stopping by today and being a part of mine. It was an absolute pleasure. It's great to see all the work that you're doing with having and creating meaningful connections for yourself, your community, your network, but also just for anyone out there in the world. Kind of just pushing that idea of meaningful connections can go a long way. So it's been really cool to see, and I cannot wait to see what you continue to do and be a guest on your podcast. But for today, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming, and I'm sure I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. See ya.